There is a particular kind of pain in looking at your own life and feeling no real connection to it. Nothing is obviously wrong. You may still be functioning, still answering messages, still showing up, still doing what needs to be done. And yet, somewhere beneath all of that, something feels missing. You don't recognize yourself anymore. Not because you changed in some clear, dramatic way, but because you disappeared slowly. So slowly, in fact, that no one noticed, maybe not even you. It often begins in places that do not look dangerous at first. In childhood, in love, in family, in friendship. In the quiet moments where you learned that being fully yourself came with a cost. Maybe your feelings were too inconvenient for someone. Maybe your needs were met with irritation, silence, or withdrawal. Maybe love felt available only when you were easy, helpful, calm, pleasing, strong, impressive, or undemanding. And so you adapted. You became more acceptable, more useful, more readable to others. You learned how to sense what people wanted before they asked. You learned how to soften parts of yourself that caused tension. You learned how to become the version of you that kept connection alive. At the time, that adaptation may have saved you. That is what makes this wound so difficult to understand. Because the parts of you that now feel false were not born out of vanity. They were born out of survival. The version of you that smiles when you feel nothing, says yes when you mean no, stays composed when you want to fall apart, and keeps caring for everyone while quietly disappearing inside. That version did not come from weakness, it came from intelligence. It came from the nervous system learning very early that belonging mattered more than authenticity. That staying connected mattered more than staying real. So you became what others needed, and at first it probably worked. People liked you, relied on you, trusted you, needed you. You may have even built an identity around being the stable one, the understanding one, the mature one, the selfless one. But there is a hidden cost to becoming emotionally fluent in everyone else while remaining illiterate in yourself. Eventually, you wake up inside a life that fits on the outside and feels foreign on the inside. You do not know what you really want anymore. You do not know what you genuinely feel until long after the moment has passed. You second-guess your reactions. You edit your thoughts before they can fully form. Even your preferences begin to feel uncertain. What do you actually like? What do you actually believe? What do you desire when no one is watching? For many people, identity loss does not feel dramatic. It feels blank. It feels like numbness. Like moving through the day with a low-grade absence. Like being present in your own life in the most technical sense, but not in a way that feels alive. You start to feel like a stranger in your routines, your relationships, even in your own voice. And because there is no visible wound, you may blame yourself for it. You tell yourself you are ungrateful, confused, too sensitive, too much in your head. But this is not random confusion. It is the consequence of chronic self-abandonment. Self-abandonment is not always obvious. Sometimes it looks like being kind, being responsible, being endlessly understanding. Sometimes it looks like patience, flexibility, emotional maturity. But underneath it, there can be a silent betrayal, a repeated leaving of yourself. A pattern of dismissing your own signals so thoroughly that over time your inner world stops speaking in a clear voice. Why would it? If every feeling is negotiated away, if every need is minimized, if every instinct is questioned, eventually the self does what anything does when ignored long enough. It goes quiet. This is where the loss becomes deeper than stress. It becomes existential. Because identity is not just made of personality traits or life choices. Identity is built through contact with your own inner experience, through honoring what hurts, through noticing what feels true, through allowing desire, anger, grief, tenderness, disappointment, and joy to belong to you without immediate correction. When that contact is repeatedly broken, the self begins to split. There is the self that functions, and there is the self that remains buried. This is where the idea of the shadow becomes useful, not as something dark or evil, but as everything you had to push out of awareness in order to stay loved, safe, or needed. Your anger may have gone there. Your selfishness, in the healthy sense of having a center, may have gone there. Your directness, your grief, your vulnerability, your ambition, your softness, your refusal. All the parts that once threatened attachment may have been sent underground, and the longer they stay there, the more unfamiliar you become to yourself. Because you are living from a partial identity, a managed identity, a survival identity. The tragedy is that this false self often gets rewarded. It becomes socially successful. It looks dependable, pleasant, adaptable. But inwardly, it can feel like emotional homelessness. You know how to perform closeness while feeling unseen. You know how to be needed without being known. You know how to stay in relationships where your role is clear, but your personhood is not. And that emptiness can follow you everywhere, into your work, into love, into solitude, into the mirror. Sometimes you begin chasing intensity just to feel something real. Sometimes you isolate because being around people makes the gap more obvious. Sometimes you become exhausted in ways sleep cannot fix, because the exhaustion is not just physical, it is the fatigue of carrying a self that is no longer true. And yet, the answer is not to become someone new. That is the old pattern in disguise. The answer is to stop abandoning the one who was left behind. Healing in this kind of wound does not begin with confidence. It begins with honesty. With noticing the moment your body tenses before you say yes. With noticing how quickly you explain yourself when you feel the possibility of disapproval. With noticing how often you shapeshift in subtle ways just to keep the emotional temperature of the room under control. These moments matter because identity is not recovered through a grand revelation. It is recovered through repeated acts of inner loyalty, small ones at first. Telling the truth in places where you once performed, admitting that something hurts, letting a feeling exist without rushing to justify it. Saying, I do not want that. Saying, that affected me. Saying, I need time. For someone who has spent years adapting, these are not small things. They are acts of return. And the return can feel uncomfortable before it feels freeing. Because when you stop being who others needed, some relationships will feel the change. Some people were attached not to your essence, but to your accessibility, to your overfunctioning, to your emotional labor, to your lack of boundaries. So when you begin to reappear, not everyone will celebrate it. That does not mean you are doing something wrong. It may mean you are finally becoming visible. Real identity is rarely found in the roles that made you acceptable. It is found in the parts of you that remained intact beneath adaptation. The parts that still know, the parts that went silent but never fully disappeared. The grief you feel now may actually be a sign of health. Because grief means something true is being recognized. You are grieving the years you lived at a distance from yourself, the choices made from fear,
the intimacy you offered without presence, the life you maintained without inhabiting. That grief is not the end of you. It is evidence that some deeper part of you is waking up. And maybe that's where recognition begins, not in suddenly knowing exactly who you are, but in no longer agreeing to be someone you are not, in no longer confusing disappearance with love, in no longer treating self-betrayal as maturity. You do not recognize yourself because for a long time you became fluent in leaving. Now the work is different. Now the work is to stay with your own experience, to stay with your own voice, to stay long enough, honest enough, that the stranger begins to feel familiar again. And one day